Hello, family of the channel. What I'm about to share today changed my life forever, and I need to share it because I know many of you have been through something similar. My name is Michael Vance, and I'm 38 years old. For the last decade, I've been a priest at St. Jude's Cathedral, a place I considered my home. It was a life of service, guided by my faith and the mentorship of a man I admired more than anyone, Bishop Alistair Blackwood. He was like a father to me, shaping me into the priest I had become. I thought I knew him. I was wrong. Today you'll see how I got my revenge in the best way possible. You'll witness the moment I was publicly accused of being a thief by my own mentor in front of my entire congregation. But you will also see how, in that very moment of deepest humiliation, God revealed the truth. The real thief wasn't a man of greed, but a spiritual force of pure evil hiding behind a familiar face. And my fight for justice began right there at the altar. It all happened during a packed Sunday Mass. The cathedral was filled to the brim, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, the air thick with the scent of incense and old prayer books. I had just finished the reading, my heart full of peace. I felt connected to my community, to my purpose. It was a beautiful, ordinary morning. The kind you take for granted until it's shattered into a million pieces. That peace was the last I would feel for a long, long time. Bishop Blackwood approached the pulpit for the homily. His face was usually warm, but that day it was a mask of cold, solemn gravity. A hush fell over the crowd, everyone leaning in to hear his wisdom. I watched from the altar, expecting a sermon on charity or forgiveness. Instead, he looked out at the faces of our parishioners, took a deep breath, and unleashed a storm that would destroy my world in a matter of seconds. His words hit me like a physical blow. My brothers and sisters, his voice boomed through the speakers, "It is with a shattered heart that I must cleanse this house of God. A serpent has been hiding among us." A confused murmur rippled through the pews. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Then he raised his arm, his finger trembling slightly as he pointed it directly at me. "This man, Father Michael Vance, has betrayed us all. He has been embezzling thousands from the charity fund for the poor." The collective gasp was like the air being sucked out of the room. I just froze, my mind unable to process the words. Embezzling? Me? It was a lie, a monstrous, impossible lie. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to shout that it wasn't true, but the bishop silenced me with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. He held all the power, and he was using it to publicly crucify me in the place I called home. My reputation, something I had spent my entire adult life building with care and honest service, was being systematically dismantled in front of the very people I had sworn to guide. I could see the faces in the congregation shift from respect to confusion, then to suspicion and contempt. Fellow priests who were my friends just moments before now refused to meet my eyes. The humiliation was absolute, a crushing weight that pinned me to the floor. Listen to my story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? The cathedral was my sanctuary, the one place on earth where I felt completely at home. My name is Michael Vance, and at 38, my life was dedicated to serving God and my community at St. Jude's. That Sunday morning was perfect. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the air in colors of sapphire and gold. The scent of incense hung heavy, a fragrance of peace. I had just finished the reading, my heart full. But peace is a fragile thing. Listen to my story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? Bishop Alistair Blackwood, the man who was more of a father to me than my own, walked to the pulpit. I watched him with respect, as always, expecting a sermon on grace or forgiveness. But the look on his face was wrong. It was a mask of cold, hard judgment, an expression I had never seen on him before. His voice, usually a warm comfort, boomed through the speakers with a chilling edge. "My brothers and sisters," he began, "it is with a shattered heart that I must cleanse this house of God." A confused murmur spread through the pews. My blood ran cold. He spoke of a serpent hiding among us, a betrayer of trust. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my gut, a primal fear that something was about to break. Then, he raised his arm, his finger trembling as he pointed it directly at me, standing by the altar. This man, his voice cracked like a whip, Father Michael Vance, has betrayed us all. He has been embezzling thousands from the charity fund for the poor. The air was sucked out of the room, replaced by a single, collective gasp. My mind went blank. The words didn't make sense. Embezzling? Me? It was an impossible, monstrous lie. I opened my mouth to shout my innocence, to scream that it wasn't true, but the bishop silenced me with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. He held all the power, and in that moment, he was my judge, jury, and executioner. I was forced to stand there in silence, the weight of 1,000 pairs of eyes pinning me to the floor, my world collapsing in on itself. The faces I saw every week, the people I had baptized, married, and comforted in their grief, were now twisted with suspicion and contempt. My fellow priests, men I considered brothers, looked away, refusing to meet my gaze. The humiliation was a physical force, crushing my spirit. In the span of 30 seconds, my life's work, my reputation, and my honor were turned to ash. But as I stood there, broken, a cold clarity pierced through the pain. This wasn't just a lie. This was an attack. And the man delivering it was not the mentor I loved. The walk from the altar to the cathedral's massive oak doors felt like a mile. Every single person I passed, people I had known for years, either stared at the floor or turned their heads away. The air, which had been filled with prayer and song moments before, was now thick with a heavy, suffocating silence. It was the silence of judgment. I didn't exist as their priest anymore. I was a spectacle, a leper being cast out of the camp. The heavy door groaned shut behind me, sealing my old life inside. I was immediately met by 2 diocesan officials I barely knew. They didn't offer a word of comfort, or even ask for my side of the story. Their faces were grim, their movements purely professional. "Father Vance," one of them said, avoiding the title Father as if it were poison, "we've been instructed to escort you from the premises." They treated me like a common criminal, walking on either side of me as if I might make a run for it. My whole world had been reduced to a walk of shame across the courtyard. My key to the rectory no longer worked. They had already changed the locks. One of the men unlocked the door to my small apartment and informed me I had 1 hour to gather my personal effects. Everything else would be boxed up and sent to me later. My home, the place where I prayed, studied, and slept, was no longer mine. I looked around at my books, my photographs, the simple wooden cross on the wall, and felt like a stranger in my own life. The news spread like a wildfire. By that evening, my name was on local news websites, my picture next to headlines about embezzlement and betrayal of trust. The story was simple and brutal. A trusted priest had stolen from the poor. There was no nuance, no allegedly, just the cold, hard accusation presented as fact. Bishop Blackwood was quoted extensively, speaking of his profound sorrow and his commitment to restoring the sanctity of St. Jude's. He played the part of the heartbroken father perfectly. My phone, which usually buzzed with messages from parishioners and friends, went silent. The few calls I tried to make went straight to voicemail. Father Thomas, a man I'd shared dinner with just last week, left me on read. Maria, who ran the soup kitchen with me, blocked my number. It was a swift and total excommunication, not just from the church, but from the community I had poured my soul into. I had never known a loneliness so complete. Within a week, my bank account was frozen. The small stipend I received from the diocese was cut off, pending the full investigation that I knew was just a formality. I had very little in savings, having always believed in living simply. Suddenly, I was facing the reality of having no home, no income, and a name so tarnished that no one would even consider hiring me for a simple job. The practical consequences of the bishop's lie were as devastating as the emotional ones. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, a place with stained carpets and the constant hum of the highway outside my window. It was a world away from the hallowed halls of St. Jude's. I would lie awake at night, staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying the bishop's words over and over. His voice, once a source of comfort, was now the soundtrack to my nightmares, his pointing finger a weapon that had pierced my soul. One afternoon, I tried to find solace in a small church across town, just to sit in a pew and pray. But a woman recognized me. I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes, followed by a look of pure disgust. She whispered to her husband, and soon, heads were turning. The stares were like tiny daggers. I couldn't even find refuge in the house of God anymore. I left before the service even started, the shame burning in my chest. Meanwhile, Bishop Blackwood was being hailed as a hero. I saw him on a local morning show, his face a mask of dignified sorrow. He announced the launch of the St. Jude's Restoration Fund, a new charity initiative to, quote, rebuild the trust that had been so cruelly broken. Donations poured in. He was using my destruction as a platform for his own glory, painting himself as the righteous leader cleaning house. It was a masterful performance. The few friends I had left from before my seminary days tried to help, but they didn't understand. They saw it as a workplace dispute, a legal problem. You should sue for defamation, my college roommate told me. But how could I sue the church? How could I explain that this wasn't about money or a job, but about a spiritual assassination? They couldn't grasp the depth of the betrayal. My own family was torn. My sister believed me, but my brother, always more pragmatic, urged me to just apologize and make it go away. He couldn't see that an apology would be an admission of guilt, a confirmation of the lie. The accusation had splintered my family, planting seeds of doubt where there had once been unconditional support. It was another layer of loss I hadn't anticipated. I received a formal letter from the diocese. It was cold, legalistic, and final. I was permanently suspended from all priestly duties. My name was to be removed from the parish registry. The letter was signed by a committee, but I knew the words were Blackwood's. Each sentence was a nail in the coffin of my former life, a deliberate effort to erase my existence from the history of St. Jude's. One day, I saw a young couple whose baby I had baptized just a few months prior. They were walking on the other side of the street. When they saw me, the wife pulled her husband closer, and they hurried away, not even offering a simple nod. The memory of me blessing their child was now tainted, a happy moment ruined by the man they believed me to be. That small act of avoidance hurt more than any headline. The worst part was the erosion of my own faith. I prayed, but my words felt hollow, bouncing off the ceiling of my dingy motel room. Where was God in all this? How could he allow such a monstrous lie to prevail, while I was left broken and alone? The silence from heaven was the most agonizing part of my fall. It felt like I hadn't just been abandoned by man, but by God himself. I started to see the bishop's face everywhere, on TV, in the newspaper, on fundraising billboards for his new charity. He looked stronger, more powerful than ever. His sermons were apparently drawing larger crowds, people flocking to see the man who had so bravely rooted out corruption. My downfall had become his ascension, and the injustice of it all ate away at me like an acid. An old retired priest named Father James was the only one from the diocese who reached out. He met me for coffee at a greasy spoon diner far from the cathedral. "I've known Alistair for 40 years, he said, his voice a low whisper. "There's always been an ambition in him, a darkness. Be careful, Michael. This isn't just about money." He didn't have answers, but his belief in me was a single candle in a vast darkness. My physical appearance began to reflect my inner state. I lost weight, dark circles formed under my eyes, and I stopped caring about how I looked. I was a ghost, haunting the edges of a city that no longer saw me. I spent my days walking aimlessly, trying to outrun the thoughts in my head, but the shame was a shadow that followed me everywhere I went. I hit rock bottom one rainy Tuesday. I was down to my last $20, my motel bill was due, and the weight of it all just crashed down on me. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, my head in my hands, and I wept, not just quiet tears, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a man who had lost everything. I felt utterly and completely defeated, a failure in the eyes of God and the world. In that moment of total despair, something shifted. It was a memory, sharp and clear, of the moment the bishop had pointed his finger at me. I remembered his eyes. It wasn't just anger or disappointment I had seen. It was something else, something cold, ancient, and utterly malevolent. It was a flash of pure hatred that didn't seem human. The accusation wasn't just a lie, it was an attack. The thought sent a jolt through me, cutting through the fog of self-pity. This wasn't a simple case of a man framing another for personal gain. The cruelty was too theatrical, the destruction too absolute. Father James's words came back to me. A darkness. I realized I wasn't fighting Bishop Blackwood, the man who had been my mentor. I was fighting the thing that was wearing his face. My training, the books on spiritual warfare and demonology I had studied, not out of necessity but out of academic curiosity, flooded my mind. The patterns, the tactics of deception, pride, and public humiliation, it all clicked into place. The enemy wasn't trying to just ruin my career. It was trying to shatter my soul and mock God by using his own house as a stage. I stood up, the tears drying on my face. My despair was being replaced by something else, a cold, hard resolve. This was not a legal battle to be fought with lawyers and evidence. This was a spiritual war. And I had been a fool to think I was just a victim. I was a soldier, and I had been targeted. My purpose was no longer to mourn what I had lost. I walked over to the single bag that held my most precious belongings. I pulled out my worn, leather-bound Bible. I didn't open it seeking comfort or solace. I opened it looking for a weapon. My hands fell upon the book of Ephesians, my eyes drawn to a verse I knew by heart. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world. A sense of clarity washed over me, so powerful it made me steady on my feet. I finally understood. My reputation, my home, my friends, they were all just collateral damage in a much older conflict. My enemy had made a critical mistake. It had pushed me so far down that I had nothing left to lose, and in doing so it had shown me its true face. My fall was over. Now, the fight would begin. My real advantage wasn't something I could hold in my hand. It was knowledge, a specific and obscure field of study that Bishop Blackwood himself had once called my morbid little hobby. Back in the seminary, while other students focused on canon law or parish administration, I was drawn to the church's ancient battles with evil. I spent countless hours in the library's dustiest corners, reading the works of the early church fathers on demonology and the tactics of spiritual warfare. It was an academic pursuit, a desire to understand the enemy. I never thought I'd have to use it. The bishop, my mentor, had always underestimated this side of me. He saw me as a gentle, pastoral priest, good with comforting the sick and counseling the troubled. He never saw the scholar beneath, the one who understood that evil was not just an absence of good, but an active, intelligent force. The demon wearing his face would have access to his memories, his opinions. It saw me as he saw me, weak, emotional, and easily broken by public shame. It was a fatal error in judgment. This knowledge was my hidden resource. I knew the patterns. I knew that demons, especially those of pride, like the one I now suspected had the bishop, loved theatrics. They crave an audience, the public accusation, the grand spectacle of my downfall in the cathedral. It wasn't just to ruin me. It was a performance designed to mock God, to turn a sacred space into a stage for its own glory, and to feed on the fear and doubt it created in the congregation. As I pieced it together in that motel room, everything clicked. The embezzlement story was the perfect lie for this kind of entity. It attacked my character, isolated me from my community, and, most importantly, it sowed discord and mistrust within the church itself. It was a classic strategy, straight out of the old texts. The entity wasn't just trying to get rid of me, it was trying to poison the entire well of St. Jude's, and it was using the bishop's authority to do it. My path forward became clear, and it had nothing to do with lawyers or proving my innocence in a court of law. My fight wasn't for my reputation anymore. It was for Bishop Blackwood's soul. My vengeance would be to free the man I once loved from the parasite that was controlling him. This wasn't about getting even. This was a rescue mission, an exorcism of the highest order, waged not in a hidden room but in the open. The demon had made the battlefield public, so I would have to meet it there. It had used the Sunday Mass as its stage, and I knew, with a certainty that could only have come from God, that I had to confront it on that same holy ground. It had drawn power from the desecration of that sacred moment, and I would have to reclaim that ground for God, using the very faith of the people it had tried to scandalize. God hadn't abandoned me in my fall. He had allowed me to be pushed to the very edge, stripped of everything, so that I would have no choice but to rely on the one weapon I had left, my faith, fortified by my knowledge. I was the only one who could see what was really happening. He had been preparing me for this battle for years, through all those lonely hours of study, and I just hadn't known it. I began my own preparation, but it wasn't about gathering earthly evidence, it was spiritual conditioning. I spent the next several days in constant prayer and fasting. I ate very little, slept even less. I needed to sharpen my spirit, to make myself a clean vessel for the power I was about to call upon. My motel room, once a symbol of my disgrace, became my monastery, my training ground for the war to come. I still had a few of my old books with me, the ones I considered most essential. I pored over the Latin rites of exorcism, not just memorizing the words but meditating on their meaning and power. I was not an officially appointed exorcist, a fact the demon would surely use to mock me, but I knew the authority to command demons didn't come from a bishop's decree. It came directly from Jesus Christ. The entity's greatest weakness was its pride. It believed it had already won. It saw me as a broken man hiding in shame on the edge of the city. It would never expect me to return. It would never imagine that its victim had the knowledge and the courage to identify it and fight back. It was basking in its victory, using the bishop's face to launch new charity funds and soak in the admiration of the public. I watched the local news online and saw that Bishop Blackwood was planning a special televised mass to celebrate the success of his St. Jude's Restoration Fund. It was to be held the following Sunday. That was it. That was my moment. The demon was creating its own stage for its downfall, blinded by its own arrogance. It would gather a huge crowd, both in person and on television, to witness its triumph. Instead, they would witness its defeat. The fear that had crippled me for weeks was gone. In its place was a cold, calm certainty of purpose. I was no longer a victim. I was a soldier. I knew the enemy's name, or at least its nature. I knew its tactics, its pride, and its weakness. It had chosen the wrong priest to destroy because it had inadvertently chosen the one man who had spent years preparing to fight it. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. This was why I had been called to the priesthood, not just for the baptisms and the weddings, but for this, to stand in the gap when darkness tries to claim a soul and a sanctuary. My personal pain didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was the battle ahead. I had my resource, I had my mission, and I had my God. The bishop, or rather the thing controlling him, thought it had cast me into the outer darkness. It was wrong. It had only pushed me into the armory. I was armed with a knowledge it never knew I possessed, and a faith it had foolishly underestimated. The game had not ended with my humiliation. It had only just begun. My comeback was not going to be a quiet one. My plan was simple and terrifying. I would walk back into that cathedral during that televised mass. I would not plead my case or proclaim my innocence to the people. I would speak directly to the entity that had framed me. I would call it out, challenge it, and wage war right there in front of the altar. It was a battle for a man's soul, and I was ready. Before I reveal how the vengeance unfolded, it's very important that you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video so that YouTube recommends this incredible story to more people. This way, you help us spread the gospel through real-life testimonies. So please, help us in this noble cause. Walking through the massive oak doors of St. Jude's felt like stepping into the lion's den. The place was packed, even more than usual, with TV cameras set up in the aisles for the special broadcast. A wave of murmurs followed me as I walked down the center aisle. I saw the faces of my accusers, their shock turning to scorn. They saw a disgraced priest, a thief bold enough to show his face. They had no idea they were about to witness a war. I kept my head high, my eyes fixed on the altar where Bishop Blackwood was speaking. I felt no fear, only a cold, divine purpose. I waited patiently through the homily, a sickening performance where Blackwood praised the community for their generosity in the face of my betrayal. My moment came as he raised his hands for the final blessing, the camera zooming in for the holy conclusion. I stepped forward from the back of the sanctuary, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the sacred silence. This blessing is a lie. A collective gasp filled the cathedral. Every eye, including the unblinking red lights of the cameras, turned to me. The bishop's smile froze on his face. He opened his mouth to have me removed, but I didn't give him the chance. I wasn't there to argue about money. I looked directly into his eyes, past the man I knew, and spoke to the darkness within. I began to pray, not in English, but in the ancient Latin of the rite of exorcism, Exorcismiste, omnis immundus spiritus. The words felt like solid things in the air. The bishop's face twisted from shock to a look of pure, unadulterated fury. The thing inside him knew it had been recognized. His voice, when it came out, was not his own. It was a low, guttural snarl that echoed unnaturally in the holy space. You dare challenge me in my own temple, insignificant priest? People in the front pews recoiled in terror. The mask was off. This was not Bishop Blackwood. This was Malthus, the demon of pride. And it was furious at being exposed. It had used my public humiliation as a feast, and I had just thrown the table over in front of all its guests. The battle was now in the open. It lunged at me with words, not fists, spitting out my deepest fears and failures. It spoke of my loneliness, my doubts, my unworthiness, but its words had no power over me anymore. I stood my ground, my rosary clutched in one hand, continuing the rite with a strength that was not my own. The air grew cold, and the lights in the cathedral flickered violently. A few brave parishioners dropped to their knees and began to pray with me, their faith adding fuel to my fire. We were no longer just an audience, we were an army. As I reached the final, binding words of the rite, I raised the simple wooden crucifix I always carried. I shouted the name of Jesus Christ, a name that demon could not bear. A brilliant light seemed to burst from the cross, striking the bishop square in the chest. He let out a deafening, inhuman shriek that was a mix of agony and rage and was thrown backward, collapsing in a heap on the marble steps of the altar. A visible, shadowy mist seemed to dissipate from his body before vanishing completely. Then there was silence. I walked forward and knelt beside the fallen bishop. The cameras were still rolling, broadcasting my vindication to the entire city. Alistair Blackwood's eyes fluttered open. They were clear, confused, and filled with a horrifying remorse. "Michael," he whispered, his own voice returning. "What have I done?" I simply helped my old mentor to his feet. I didn't need to say a word. The real thief had been cast out, and my name was cleared not by evidence or arguments, but by a miracle. My silent victory was complete. If you made it to the end of the video, comment with the phrase, "Jesus is good," and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving more stories like this one.